The monastery is quiet before the teaching begins. You have traveled some distance to be here, and now, at last, you have arrived. Outside, the mountain is dark and unhurried. The air carries pine and the faint trace of incense from the shrine room nearby. Somewhere in the building, a door settles. Then silence. Something brought you here. A question the mind returns to in the still hours. The space just before sleep, the quiet between thoughts. Why did this happen? What does it mean? And beneath those questions, the quiet exhaustion of carrying them. Tonight, an elder monk will sit with you and explore a teaching the Buddha offered to those who carry exactly this. Not an answer in the way the mind expects, but something older and in the end more restful. The teaching that nothing arises without conditions. Through a web of causes too vast for any single mind to hold. In truly understanding this, something in the search begins to loosen. If you are lying down, let the body settle. Let the weight of the day release beneath you. Welcome to Moon Mind Temple. You open your eyes before the bell rings. Dawn is still a rumor outside the window, a faint pale lightning at the edge of the mountains, and the room is cold in the way that monasteries are cold, clean and still and completely honest about it. You pull the thin blanket closer and lie there for a moment, listening. The bell comes eventually, low and resonant, spreading across the buildings and paths and the courtyard garden in the way that sound does in high places, as if the air itself has more room to carry it. You hear footsteps in the corridor outside, the soft brush of robes against stone, the quiet creak of a wooden door somewhere further along the hall. Something in you does not want to move. The tiredness is real, but the real weight is the question, the one that followed you here across the distance and the unfamiliar roads and the mountain path that seemed to have no end. Why did this happen? Why this, and not something else? What did it mean? You have asked this in many different ways, in many different rooms. You have turned it over in your mind the way a person turns a stone in their hand, searching the surface for something that might finally explain it. The stone is always smooth. There is nothing written there. You dress quietly and make your way to the courtyard, where the sky is beginning to separate itself from the mountains in gradations of grey and pale gold. A young monk is already sweeping the stone path in slow, deliberate strokes, and the sound of the broom on the stone is somehow the most peaceful thing you have heard in a long while. You stand and watch for a moment before you realize you are simply standing, simply watching, without thinking about anything at all. The question is quiet, just for now. The elder monk finds you there. He is smaller than you expected, compact and unhurried, wrapped in saffron with a shawl pulled around his shoulders against the morning chill. His face carries the quality of someone who has spent a long time paying attention. Something more like what happens to stone near water, shaped by long patience rather than worn by effort. He nods when he sees you, a nod that says, "There you are." as if he has been expecting you all his life. "You slept?" he asks. "A little," you say. He nods again, as if this is the correct answer. "Come, we will walk before we sit." The body understands things the mind can only follow. The path winds between stone walls and old pine trees. The air carries resin and mist and something faintly sweet. Incense drifting from the shrine room, which is already lit inside, its small amber glow visible through the latticed screen. You walk in silence for several minutes. It should feel awkward. It does not. He has the quality of someone who finds silence useful rather than empty, who does not feel the need to fill it with anything. "You came here with a question," he says eventually. He says it the way someone might remark on the weather. Observing, not interrogating. You agree that you did. "Tell me not the event," he says. "I don't need the facts of what happened. Tell me what the mind does with it. What does it keep doing?" You think about this honestly. It keeps asking why. You say, "It looks for a reason." It feels like, if I could just understand why this happened, I could put it down. Accept it, maybe. But I can't find the reason, so I keep picking it back up. He walks a few more paces before he responds. "And if you found the reason," he says, "what would change?" The question catches you unprepared. You open your mouth to answer and find that you do not quite know. The pain would, what? Be justified? Make sense? Be revealed as necessary, as part of something larger? He watches you search for the answer without hurrying you. "The mind believes," he says at last, "that understanding would bring relief, that if the event had a purpose, if the universe arranged it for a reason, if it was meant to teach you something, then the suffering would become bearable. Justified suffering is easier to carry than suffering that simply is." You recognize this immediately. That is exactly what your mind has been doing, looking for the justification that will make the weight feel earned. "Is that wrong?" you ask. "It is natural," he says. The mind craves coherence. It does not tolerate things that arrive without explanation. But what I want to offer you today is something older than an explanation. Something the Buddha observed while sitting alone in a grove not unlike this one, before any of these buildings existed, before this path was cleared. He stops walking and turns to face you. The sun is breaking across the ridge behind him now, and the light catches the dew on the grass in a sudden, ordinary way that makes the whole world look briefly new. The Buddha did not offer a cosmic explanation, he says. What he noticed was simpler than that, and more difficult to accept. He saw that when something painful happens, the untrained mind does two things. It receives the first pain, the event itself, the loss, the difficulty, the moment of impact, and then immediately, so quickly it appears to be part of the same movement, it adds a second pain on top of the first. A story, a judgment, a demand that the universe account for itself. He begins walking again. You fall into step beside him. Why me? The monk continues quietly. Why now? What does this say about who I am? Is there something I was supposed to learn? Was I being punished? Was I not careful enough? You walk in silence with that for a moment. Each of those questions is familiar, more than familiar. He called this the second arrow, the monk says. The first arrow is the event. It arrived. You did not choose it. The second arrow is what the mind does in response. The suffering it lays on top of the suffering, the story it builds around the wound, the weight it adds to weight. And the second arrow, the Buddha observed, is the one we shoot ourselves. You stop walking without meaning to. The image is stark and unexpectedly exact. You can see it clearly now. The event, and then, so swiftly you had never separated them. The story about the event, the meaning making, the why hunting, the silent demand that life explain itself, justify itself, reveal some larger architecture that makes this pain make sense. The event was one thing. The machinery the mind built around it was something else entirely. The Buddha also taught this. The monk says, mind is the forerunner of all things. What the mind leads with, the experience follows. The mind that greets difficulty with the second arrow does not simply suffer the event. It creates the conditions for continued suffering long after the event has passed. The wound stays open not because the first arrow is still there, but because the mind keeps returning to ask why the arrow was fired. He waits a moment for this to settle. What the second arrow actually costs you, he continues, is presence. Every moment spent demanding an explanation for the past is a moment not spent inside what is actually here. The search for meaning pulls you backward, away from the thing itself, into a story about the thing. And in that story, the mind cannot rest. It cannot heal. It is too busy constructing its case. A gust of wind moves through the pine trees at the edge of the path, and the needles shiver all at once, then go still. The silence that follows is complete. Then what do we do, you ask? If the mind just does this automatically, if the second arrow is picked up before you even realize it is happening. For now, he says, you learn to see it. Stopping it comes later and only slowly. The practice for now is simply to notice the moment when pain ends and the story about pain begins. When something that was just an event becomes something the mind insists must have a reason, a lesson. That noticing is the beginning of putting the second arrow down. He leaves you standing there at the bend in the path, the mountains wide and unhurried beyond the monastery walls, the morning light crossing the courtyard in long, slow angles. The question is still there, but something about it has shifted. It feels less like a demand, more like an opening. What if there is no hidden reason it happened? What if the search for that reason has been the second arrow all along? The bell rings a second time, its tone clear and carrying. The monks are gathering for morning practice, their robes moving through the courtyard in unhurried, orderly streams. You watch them for a moment, these people who have made a life out of learning to put the second arrow down, morning after morning after morning. Something in you, very quietly, begins to wonder if that is something you could learn. Later, as you sit in the meditation hall beside the monk While the morning chanting continues in the next room, he returns to the teaching. The hall is spare and beautiful in its sparseness. Wooden floors, worn smooth by decades of sitting, paper screens, filtering the morning light into something soft and without edges. A single stick of incense burning in a clay holder near the door. There is a teaching in the ancient texts, the monk says, his voice barely above the level of the chanting. It says, "Mind is the forerunner of all things. What the mind leads with, experience follows." He lets this sit for a moment. Think of the last time something small went wrong. A small inconvenience. A delay, a spilled cup, a misread message. Now think of what the mind did immediately after. You think of mornings when the smallest friction, an alarm that did not go off, a reply that came too late, sent a kind of shadow over everything that followed. The whole day coloured by a moment. The event may have been small, the monk says, but the mind picked up the second arrow so quickly that you never felt the gap between them. The irritation became a story about the day, about your luck, about what this probably meant. And that story created the conditions for the next hour and the hour after that. He rests his hands in his lap and looks toward the screen and the soft filtered light beyond it. This is what the teaching is pointing at, he says. Pain is what it is. Unavoidable, real, part of being alive. The arrow the mind adds to pain is something else. The demand that pain come with an explanation, a lesson it was always meant to deliver. That demand is weight on top of weight, and that weight we do not have to carry. The chanting in the next room rises slightly, then settles into a long, sustained tone that seems to fill the space between the walls and the floor and the ceiling, leaving no room for anything else. For a moment, you are simply inside it. Put the second arrow down, the monk says very quietly. Just that much. Just for tonight. After morning practice, the monk leads you into the monastery garden. It is a place that seems to operate on its own quiet authority. Stone pathways between raised beds of herbs and vegetables, old fruit trees espaliered against a south-facing wall, a bamboo grove at the far edge where the canes click softly against each other in the wind. Everything carefully tended, nothing forced. He stops beside a raised bed where small green seedlings have just broken through the soil. He crouches down, examines one of them for a moment with the same quality of attention he brings to everything, then looks up at you. "Tell me what you see," he says. You crouch beside him. "A plant," you say. "A seedling. Growing." "Growing," he repeats. "From what?" You look at the soil, the seedling, the sky above. "From the seed," you say, "and the soil, and the water, and..." You think for a moment. "The sun, and the farmer who planted the seed, and the rain that came at the right time, and the earthworms working through the soil beneath our feet, and the temperature that did not drop below freezing last night, and the fact that someone cleared this bed of stones before the planting," He pauses. How far back do we go? You look at the seedling differently now. What seemed like a simple fact, a plant growing, has become something with depth behind it, causes behind the causes, conditions supporting the conditions, all the way back and back until the line disappears into everything that has ever been. The Buddha observed this, the monk says, rising and beginning to walk slowly along the path between the beds. He called it arising through conditions. The simplest version of the teaching is this: when this is, that is. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. When this is not, that is not. He stops and turns to you. Say it back to me. You try. When this is, that is. Yes. And from the arising of this comes the arising of that. Yes. That formula, those two lines, contains one of the most important insights in the entire teaching. Hold it for a moment. Do not try to understand it yet. Just hold it. You walk in silence, holding it. When this is, that is. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. Now, the monk says after a while, apply it to the seedling. When the seed is, the plant is. When the rain is, the seed can germinate. When the warmth is, the shoot can reach the light. When the soil is in the right condition, the root can take hold. He looks at you. Is there a moment in this chain where something arises from nothing? Where something comes into existence without depending on anything else? You think about it. There is not. Every moment in the chain leans on what came before it. Exactly. The monk says, watching your face. This is what the Buddha saw. A web of conditions so vast and interconnected that the human mind cannot trace it all the way back. But it can learn to see the principle at work in small things. Like this seedling, like this morning, like the mood you woke up with. He stops beside one of the old fruit trees against the wall, its branches trained over decades by hands long gone. Someone planted this tree 40 years before I arrived, he says. They will never eat its fruit. I eat it every autumn. Their intention, their planting, conditions that ripple forward through time. You look at the tree differently. The person who planted it, the seasons they would not live to see. We think of ourselves as separate. The monk says, as individuals beginning and ending in one body, in one lifetime. But the teaching of arising through conditions suggests something more intricate than that. The conditions that shape your life right now include actions taken before you were born by people who never knew you, and the conditions you create today will reach people who do not yet exist. A breeze moves through the garden. The bamboo at the far edge stirs. The movement in one cane touching the next. The whole grove shivering in a slow wave from one end to the other. Then still. When this is, that is, he says quietly. You sit with that for a while. Later, as you walk back toward the main building, he continues. Most people, when they first hear this teaching, think it means that everything is determined. That, if everything arises from prior conditions, then the present moment was always going to be exactly this. Fixed, inevitable, the inevitable result of everything before it. Is it? You ask. It is a reasonable question, he says. But consider, a seed planted in poor soil does not grow the same plant as a seed planted in rich soil. The same seed, different conditions, different outcome. The conditions do not produce a fixed result. They make certain outcomes possible and others unlikely. They create the situation in which things can arise or fail to arise. He pauses beside a small composting area at the edge of the garden, kitchen scraps and garden cuttings, quietly becoming soil. Intention is also a condition, he says. The mind is not simply a product of conditions. It is also a producer of them. Every intentional action you take creates conditions. Every moment of attention, every response you choose rather than react, every time you pause before speaking, these are conditions you are creating. And conditions you create now will shape what arises next. You stand looking at the compost, scraps becoming soil, loss becoming foundation. So we are not just at the mercy of conditions, you say. We are both shaped by conditions and creating them, the monk says. This is what makes the teaching livable. You did not choose the conditions you were born into. You did not choose the family, the country, the body, the early experiences that shaped the patterns of your mind. But every moment of awareness, every intentional response rather than automatic reaction, this is you participating in the shaping of what comes next. The web is not fixed. You are in it, and you are part of what it becomes. The sun has moved higher now. The garden is fully lit, warm on the stones and the leaves and the backs of your hands. There is one more thing the teaching says. The monk continues. When this is not, that is not. From the cessation of this comes the cessation of that. The teaching works in both directions. If the conditions for suffering are present, suffering arises. If those conditions change, if they are met with awareness, with understanding, with a different response, then what arises changes. Nothing is permanent by nature. Everything that has arisen because of conditions can change when conditions change. He turns to face you fully for the first time since you entered the garden. Whatever you are carrying, he says, arose through conditions. It was not inevitable. It was not deserved. It was not written into the nature of things as a permanent truth about you. It arose because certain causes and conditions came together. And causes and conditions change, he pauses. Which means what has arisen can also cease. The garden holds this thought in its unhurried way. The seedlings grow. The old tree stands. The composting continues at the edge. Everything in motion, nothing fixed. The whole web of arising and ceasing moving in its ancient and patient rhythm. You think of the formula he gave you. When this is, that is. From the arising of this, that arises. When this is not, that is not. It is more than comfort. It is the description of a world in which nothing is permanently broken. Nothing is beyond change, because nothing, not a single moment of experience, arises outside the web of conditions. And conditions, always and without exception, can change. The monk watches you with something that might be satisfaction. Rest with that for now. he says. The teaching will settle in its own time. Seeds do not explain themselves while they are growing. He turns and walks back along the path toward the monastery. You remain in the garden a little longer, watching the light on the leaves and the slow, imperceptible movement of everything growing, arising, dependent on everything else. Nothing arises without conditions. And in that understanding, quietly, something begins to ease. He has gone inside, but you find that you are not ready to follow. You sit on the low stone wall at the edge of the garden and let the morning work on you. The warmth of the sun on your face, the smell of the turned earth, the small sound of bees moving through the herb beds nearby. The garden does not ever hurry. Nothing in it explains itself. Everything simply continues, arising from what preceded it, offering itself to what will follow. You think about your own life in this new language. The situation that brought you to this monastery, the one that keeps asking why. Try the formula. When this is, that is. What conditions were present? What arose because of what? You start to trace it, and immediately the web becomes more complex than you expected. The situation arose from a decision. That decision arose from a belief. The belief arose from an experience. The experience arose from circumstances you did not choose. The further back you trace, the wider the web spreads. It is strangely settling. The situation is not a verdict. It is not a punishment or a failing or a sign of something permanently wrong. It is an arising, complicated, multiply-caused, the result of a web of conditions stretching back further than any single mind can follow. The monk returns with 2 small cups of tea. He hands you one without comment and sits beside you on the wall. For a few minutes you both look at the garden. You were thinking, he says. About my own life, you say, trying to trace the conditions. And there are too many, you say. I can't find the beginning. There is no beginning, he says simply. That is part of what the teaching is pointing at. The web does not have an edge. The conditions that shaped this morning include actions taken in this monastery 100 years ago, and conditions that shaped those actions reach back further still. And further, he sips his tea. The human mind wants to find the starting point, the original cause, the first domino, but the teaching says there is no such thing. Conditions arise from conditions, all the way back. That should feel overwhelming, you say. But it doesn't. No, he says. For most people, it is the opposite. Because when you see that there is no original cause, no moment at which things could have been fundamentally different, if only you had done the one right thing, the self-blame begins to loosen. You could not have started the web differently. You arrived inside a web already in motion. What you can do is pay attention to the conditions you are creating right now, in this moment, with this response. A bee lands on the rim of your cup, investigates the rim, and departs. Neither of you moves. After it has gone, you both drink. Most suffering, the monk continues, comes from treating a condition as if it were a permanent fact. A mood arises and we say, "This is who I am." A relationship ends and we say, "I am someone to whom this happens." A mistake is made and we say, "This is what I always do." He looks at you. Do you hear the difference between a condition and a definition? You think about the way the mind speaks to itself. The language of conditions used as verdict. A condition is temporary by nature, he says. Everything that has arisen through conditions will cease when conditions change. The mood arose from tiredness, from a particular conversation, from the quality of the light. When those conditions shift, the mood will shift. The question is whether we make decisions and form beliefs about ourselves in the middle of conditions we have mistaken for permanent truths. The tea is finished. The bees continue their work in the herb beds. Somewhere in the main building, the quiet sound of sweeping. There is a practice, the monk says, that comes from this understanding. When something difficult arises, a feeling, a thought, an impulse, instead of immediately acting on it or immediately trying to suppress it, you pause. You ask, what conditions gave rise to this? You do not need to trace the web all the way back. You simply notice, this arose. It arose because of something. It will change because conditions change. And in that small gap of noticing, a different response becomes possible. He stands and stretches, unhurried. You do not have to rebuild your whole life from this teaching in one morning, he says. Seeds do not explain themselves while they are growing. The teaching settles in its own time. What matters is that you have heard it, that somewhere in you it is beginning to work. He goes inside. The garden continues without him, without you, doing what it has always done, arising, growing, resting, returning to soil, beginning again. The seedlings he showed you this morning are still there in their row, unremarkable and unhurried, becoming what conditions allow them to become. By afternoon, the monastery has settled into its quieter rhythm. The novices are in study. The older monks are resting or at private practice. The courtyard is empty except for a cat sleeping in a patch of sunlight near the wall, completely indifferent to the mountain and the teaching and everything else. The elder monk has brought you to a small covered veranda at the back of the main building, overlooking a terraced hillside where rows of tea plants descend in careful steps toward the valley below. He pours tea from a simple clay pot into 2 bowls and sets one before you without ceremony. When I first understood what this teaching was actually saying, he begins, I noticed something unexpected. He wraps both hands around his bowl and looks out at the terraced hillside. It felt like relief. You wait. I had been studying for several years, he continues. I had heard the formula many times. When this is, that is. From the arising of this, that arises, I could recite it. I could explain it. But one morning I was sitting in the garden, much like this one, and something settled into place. And what I felt was not the heaviness I had expected from a teaching about causes and conditions. What I felt was lightness. He sips his tea. Outside, a bird lands on one of the tea plants and is gone again. I had been carrying a particular misunderstanding, he says. The same one most people carry when they first encounter this teaching. I thought it meant that everything was fixed, that if every moment arises from prior conditions, then the present moment was inevitable, and the next moment is already determined. And so nothing I do truly matters. You recognize this. It was the question you almost asked in the garden this morning. That misreading, the monk says, produces a particular kind of despair. If everything is already caused, then I am simply a leaf in a river. My choices are not really choices. My efforts are not really efforts. The whole business of trying to live well begins to feel like theatre, performed by a person who is actually just the result of everything that came before. He sets down his bowl. But this is not what the teaching says. This is what the teaching is heard as by a mind that is only listening to half of it. Which half, you ask? The arising half, he says. When this is, that is, everyone hears that part. The world arises from conditions. Every moment is shaped by what came before. Yes. But the formula has a second line that most people do not sit with long enough. He pauses. When this is not, that is not. From the cessation of this comes the cessation of that. You turn this over. When this is not, that is not. The teaching works in both directions. He says, if craving is present, suffering arises from that craving. This is the arising side. But when craving is not present, that suffering does not arise. This is the cessation side. And this, the Buddha said, is liberation. The most precise description of freedom he could offer. A long pause. The cat in the courtyard stretches, rearranges itself, goes still again. So the teaching is not a cage, you say. It is a map, he says. It shows you the territory and, more importantly, it shows you where the exits are. If suffering arises from craving, from grasping, from aversion, and these are conditions, then when those conditions change, what they produce changes. The door is not locked. You are simply standing in a room, looking at the wall, having not yet turned around. You sit with that image. A room, a door behind you. But, you say, how do you change conditions? If I am shaped by causes I did not choose, how do I actually change anything? He nods slowly. This is the question he was waiting for. Intention, he says. Intention is also a condition. This is the part that changes everything. When the Buddha said mind is the forerunner of all actions, he was not saying that the mind creates reality through wishful thinking. He was saying something more precise and more useful. He was saying that intentional action, the quality of attention you bring, the choices you make within the conditions given to you, these are themselves conditions. They feed back into the web. He picks up his tea bowl again and holds it lightly. Think of the gardener we spoke of this morning. She does not control the rain or the soil she inherited, but her intention, where she plants, what she tends, what she chooses to cultivate, is a condition too. It shapes what the garden becomes. She is part of what the garden is. So we have agency, you say, within the conditions we are given. Within and through them, he says. When you cultivate patience, patience becomes a condition for more patience. When you cultivate awareness, awareness becomes a condition that makes the next moment of awareness more possible. The web is not static. It is continuously shaped by what you bring to it. The light on the hillside has shifted. The tea plants below are lit now from the west. each row casting a thin shadow behind it. The terraces step down to the valley in the way that long, patient work sometimes does. Accumulated and real, built over years that no single season could account for. There is something else the teaching dissolves, the monk says. A second fear. Some people hear that nothing arises without conditions and feel a kind of emptiness. If nothing happens for a reason, then nothing matters. If there is no purpose behind events, then life is simply mechanism. And the question underneath is, does any of it mean anything? He looks at you to see if this is familiar. It is. This is also a misreading, he says. The teaching does not say nothing matters. It says the meaning you seek is not hidden behind events as cosmic purpose. The kind of meaning you were looking for, assigned, waiting to be decoded, is not where you thought it was. He stands and moves to the edge of the veranda, looking out at the valley. The meaning in this teaching, he says, is that your actions have real consequences. Your intentions create real conditions. Your attention shapes what arises in the minds of people around you. The love you offer genuinely conditions what those people are able to offer in turn. It is more meaningful than any cosmic plan because it is actual and present. You are genuinely doing it right now. With every single moment, he turns back to you. The teaching does not give you a reason why. It gives you something more reliable than a reason. It gives you the mechanics of how suffering arises, how it ceases, how intention threads through the web, how the next moment is shaped by this one. You look at your own hands resting in your lap. Conditions, intentions, the web in motion right now, in this room, in this body, in this breath. Right now, the monk says quietly, conditions are arising that are shaping how you receive this teaching. The quality of your attention is a condition. The tiredness or rest in your body is a condition. The openness or resistance in your mind is a condition. You are not a passive listener. You are part of what this moment is becoming. The thought settles slowly, the way the evening light settles on the valley. Not all at once, but gradually, changing everything by degrees. What conditions, the monk asks, are shaping how you are listening right now? You notice the breath, the slight easing in the chest that has been building since this morning. The question that came here with you, still present, but sitting differently now. Less like a demand, more like something you can set down and pick up again by choice. Something is different, you say. Yes, he says. That difference is itself a condition, and it will shape what arises next. He refills your tea bowl without asking. The warmth of it spreads through your hands and up into your arms, and for a moment you are simply there. The veranda, the valley, the late afternoon light, the tea, the teaching settling into the body the way warmth does. As something felt, settling into the body the way warmth does. Rest here for a while, the monk says. The teaching is always in motion. You do not need to resolve it today. Something in you is already working with it. Conditions already shifting, already becoming the ground for what comes next. Later, he suggests a short walk before the light fails entirely. You follow him out through a gate at the back of the monastery and down a narrow path between the rows of tea plants. The ground underfoot is soft from recent rain. Each bush is trimmed to a flat-topped shape, and the new growth at the top is a brighter green than the older leaves below. Young conditions arising from older ones. The map works the same way, the monk says as you walk between the rows. When you understand which conditions produce suffering, you can begin, slowly, without urgency, to cultivate different conditions, to tend what you want to grow and stop feeding what causes harm. A gardener's process. The question carries the openness of someone who has sat with it himself. What conditions have you been cultivating? You think about this honestly. Anxiety, perhaps. The habit of returning to difficulty and worrying it like a stone. The reaching for certainty in a world that offers none. The second arrow, picked up so many times it has become automatic. Some things I would rather not have cultivated. You say. He nods. Those habits arose from conditions, from early experiences, from ways of coping that once worked, from patterns absorbed before you were old enough to choose. They are conditions that arose and were reinforced, which means they can change. You stop and look at the valley below. The map shows the territory. The monk says, standing beside you, here is where suffering arises. Here are the conditions that feed it. Here are the conditions that do not. The path from one to the other is real. Every moment of genuine attention, every time you notice the second arrow before it lands, every breath taken in awareness rather than distraction, these are conditions accumulating. Quietly, without announcement, a wind moves up from the valley, cool and carrying the smell of the farms below. This is why the Buddha began his teaching with attention to the present moment. The monk continues, because this moment, right now, is the only place where intention can act. The past is a condition already formed. The future is a condition not yet here. But this breath, this noticing, this quality of attention, this is where the web is being woven right now. By you, with whatever you bring to it, you breathe, present, in the body, on the hillside, the teaching no longer somewhere above you as an idea, but settling into the same ground you are standing on. When I was a young monk, he says, I thought I needed to understand the teaching completely before I could move. A slight smile. I was very thorough and very stuck. What changed, you ask? I stopped trying to understand the whole web, he says, and started paying attention to the one thread I could actually reach. This moment, this breath, this quality of mind right now, that was enough. Because that one thread connects to everything else. The light on the terraces below has turned gold. The shadows between the rows have deepened. Everything quietly becoming its next version of itself. Nothing stays the same, he says. The light is already different from an hour ago. The body has shifted. The mood you arrived with this morning has become something else. Conditions are always moving. And in that movement, in the fact that nothing is fixed, is the ground of all possibility. He turns to walk back up toward the monastery. That is what I felt, he says. On that morning in the garden, when the teaching finally settled, it was the lightness of a door standing open. I had been standing in the room looking at the wall, and then I turned around. The cat in the courtyard has moved to the base of the far stone wall. The shadows on the tea terraces have lengthened. Somewhere below, A bell from a village in the valley sounds once and is slowly absorbed by distance. Everything arising, everything in motion. Nothing fixed, nothing wasted, nothing outside the web of what conditions produce and what conditions can release. Evening comes early to the monastery. By the time the last light has left the mountains, the building has quieted into its final rhythm of the day. Soft footsteps in corridors, the distant sound of evening chanting from the shrine room, the smell of incense and wood smoke moving through the cold air. The monk finds you in the small room where you have been sitting since returning from the hillside. He settles onto a cushion across from you and says nothing for a while. The candle on the low table between you shifts and straightens in some current of air neither of you can feel. Then he says, "Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Sit with it before you answer." He pauses. What happens in the moment before a thought arises? You turn your attention inward, back toward the place where thoughts seem to come from. But the mind, watched directly, produces another thought about watching. You try again. The same thing happens. "I can't see it," you say. The thought is already there by the time I notice it. He nods as if this is exactly the right answer. Yes, the arising is faster than the noticing. By the time the mind sees the thought has already arrived. And yet, something produced it. Conditions produced it. And those conditions arose and were present for a moment and then changed. And when they changed, that particular thought could no longer arise. He looks at you steadily. Everything that arises passes. Without exception, the candle between you dips and recovers. This is the first of 3 things the Buddha said are true of everything that exists. The monk says, everything the Buddha said. Every thought, every mood, every sensation, every relationship, every version of yourself that you have ever been. All of it arises through conditions, and all of it passes when conditions change. You sit with that for a moment. Outside, the evening chanting has risen slightly, then settled. The second thing, he continues, is this. What we cling to tends to disappoint. The thing itself may be beautiful and real, but it cannot remain what it was. The conditions that produced it are changing even as you hold it. The relationship you loved was a living process, always in motion. The version of yourself you were most comfortable with was a pattern arising from certain conditions of age, circumstance, health, habit. When those conditions shifted, that version of you could no longer be exactly what it was. He pauses. The candle casts a small circle of warmth. Beyond it, the room is dark. We suffer most, he says, when we have decided that what is changing must not change. When we have taken something temporary and treated it as permanent. When we have asked a condition to become a guarantee. This lands with a particular weight. You think of the things you have held most tightly, the ones whose loss still aches, the ones whose changing felt like a betrayal. Of you, of the relationship, of the way things were supposed to be. That ache, the monk says quietly, as if reading your thoughts, is real. It deserves to be felt. What the teaching does not ask you to do is add the second arrow to it. to demand that the loss have a purpose, to insist that the ending was a message. But some losses do feel like a message, you say, like the universe is saying something. I understand, he says. The mind reaches for meaning in loss the way a drowning person reaches for anything solid. It is the mind doing what minds do. But the teaching says something more generous than that. It says, the ending was what conditions produce. The love was real. The ending was real. No hidden purpose is required for either of them to have mattered. He sits in silence for a moment. The ending does not cancel the meaning of what was. A summer that ends does not prove the summer was meaningless. A relationship that changes does not erase what was true inside it. A version of yourself that you can no longer be does not mean that person never mattered. He pauses. Things end because conditions change. That is all. And that is enough to grieve, honestly, without the additional weight of trying to decode it. Something in you releases a small, almost imperceptible amount of tension. It has been there for so long you had stopped noticing it. The constant low effort of trying to make the losses mean something, trying to construct a narrative in which they were necessary, purposeful, sent. And the third thing, you ask, when you are ready. The monk looks at the candle for a moment before he answers. The third thing is the most surprising, he says, and perhaps the most freeing. The Buddha observed that at the center of all this arising and passing, all these conditions producing experience, the thoughts and moods and sensations and relationships, there is no fixed self. He lets this sit. What he meant is this. What we call the self is also a process, a continuously arising process, shaped by conditions, changing with conditions, never exactly the same from one moment to the next. The person you were at the age of 7 arose from certain conditions. The body of a child, the family around you, the early patterns of perception and response. That person was real, and the conditions that produced that person changed. And so that particular version of the self could no longer arise in exactly the same way. You think about this, but I am still me, you say, continuously, across all of that. Yes, he says, there is continuity. The teaching is not saying you do not exist or that nothing persists. It is saying that what persists is more like a river than a stone. The river is real. It has a name. It flows through the same valley year after year. But the water in it is never the same water. The shape of the banks changes. The depth changes with the seasons. What we call the river is a process, not an object. And so are we. The candle flickers. A door closes somewhere in the building. The chanting has ended and the monastery is very quiet now. What this means practically, the monk says, is that you are not as fixed as you fear. The patterns that cause you suffering, the habits of mind, the automatic responses, the ways of seeing that narrow your world, these arose through conditions. They are not you in any permanent sense. They are what the conditions produced. And conditions, as we have been saying all day, can change. So the self that is suffering, you say slowly, is also impermanent. Yes, he says, the self that suffers is a process. And when the conditions that produce that particular suffering change, when awareness enters, when understanding shifts, when the second arrow is set down, a different process arises. Something a little more open, a little less defended. Still you, as the river is still the river, but not frozen into the version of yourself that the suffering requires. You sit with this for a long while. Outside, the night has fully arrived. The mountains are invisible now, absorbed into darkness. These three things, you say eventually, everything passes. Clinging disappoints. There is no fixed self. They sound like a difficult teaching, like something that should feel heavy. And yet, he says, and yet they don't. Right now, they feel like something opening. He nods. There is satisfaction in the nod, but also something like relief, as if this is the response the teaching was always hoping for. When you truly see that everything that arises passes, he says, you stop trying to freeze the good moments and outrun the difficult ones. You can be fully inside what is happening, because you are not also managing your relationship to whether it stays or goes. When you truly see that clinging disappoints, you can love without demanding that what you love remain unchanged. You can hold things with an open hand, fully present to them, not gripping. And when you see that the self is a process, he says, you stop defending it so hard. You stop needing every experience to confirm the story you have been telling about who you are. You become available to being surprised by yourself, available to changing. He blows out the candle. In the darkness that follows, the room is still. Your breath is steady. The question he asked at the beginning, what happens in the moment before a thought arises, is still there somewhere in the back of your awareness, working at something you cannot quite name. Sleep well, the monk says. Tomorrow we will look at the mind itself more closely. Tonight, let what you have heard settle in its own time. He rises and is gone, leaving you alone in the dark with the smell of the extinguished candle and the wide, unhurried fact of everything passing, including this moment, including the quiet, including whatever version of yourself you brought here today. Later, while the monastery sleeps, you find yourself still awake. The question the monk asked has not left you. What happens in the moment before a thought arises? And now, in the dark, you find yourself actually trying, watching the space between thoughts, catching the edges of experience as they form and dissolve. A memory arrives on its own. Someone you loved. A version of a relationship that no longer exists in the form you knew it. You let it be present rather than turning away from it or immediately explaining it to yourself. The monk's words come back. The ending does not cancel the meaning of what was. You let that land fully, perhaps for the first time. The love was real. The ending was real. You do not need to choose between them. You do not need the ending to have been necessary in order for the love to have mattered. The summer was real even though it ended. The warmth was real. The light was real. Something in you, very slowly, stops arguing. In the morning, before the bell, the monk comes to find you where you are still sitting. He looks at your face and seems to understand something without needing to ask. You sat with it, he says. Yes, he sits beside you in the pre-dawn quiet. The third characteristic is the one most people resist, he says after a while. returning to the teaching as if no time has passed. The idea that there is no fixed self feels threatening, because if there is no fixed self, then who is it that loses? Who is it that grieves? Who is it that has been doing all this living? That is exactly what I kept thinking. You say, yes. The mind protects its sense of continuous selfhood very strongly, and the teaching does not ask you to abandon that sense. It asks you to look at it more carefully, to see it as a process rather than a thing. And when you do, he pauses, you find something unexpected. The process is more alive than the thing. The river is more present than a stone would be. He looks out through the lattice screen at the greying sky. The self that suffers is real, he says. The pain is real. The grief is real. The teaching does not ask you to pretend otherwise. It simply shows you that the self who suffers is not permanent and unchangeable. It is a process in motion, a process that has arrived at a particular configuration under particular conditions. And like every other process, it is capable of being other than it currently is. A bird calls once outside, testing the silence. Then the bell rings. Low and carrying, the monastery beginning its day. There is a practice that comes from understanding these three things. The monk says, rising slowly. When something difficult arises, a mood, a memory, a grief, instead of asking what it means or how to make it stop, you simply notice, this is arising. This, too, will pass. I am not the fixed self that this feeling says I am. These three recognitions do not dissolve the difficulty, but they create space around it. He pauses at the door. Space, he says quietly, is where something genuinely new can arise. All of it arising, all of it real, all of it passing, nothing frozen, nothing wasted, nothing required to be other than it is. The morning meal at the monastery is a quiet affair. Simple food, taken in silence. Each person present to what is in front of them. Afterwards, while the other monks disperse to their duties, the elder monk leads you to a small room lined with low shelves of worn books and scrolls. Morning light comes through a single east-facing window and falls across the floor in a clean, pale rectangle. He takes down a small volume from the nearest shelf, opens it without hesitation to a particular page, and reads aloud. Mind is the forerunner of all actions. All deeds are led by mind, created by mind. If one speaks or acts with a corrupted mind, suffering follows as the wheel follows the hoof of an ox. He closes the book and sets it down. That is the very first verse of an ancient collection of teachings called the Ambapālī, he says. The Buddha is recorded to have said this more than 2,500 years ago. And this morning I want to sit with you and ask, what does it actually mean? You look at the closed book. The verse is stark. Suffering follows as the wheel follows the hoof of an ox. An image of inevitability, of something being pulled along behind an action, whether the actor wants it to or not. The verse sounds like a warning, you say. It is sometimes read that way, the monk says. And there is a second verse that follows it, which offers the other side. if one speaks or acts with a clear mind, a mind of understanding and goodwill, happiness follows like a shadow that never departs. The teaching works both ways, as we have seen it always does. He sits down on a cushion near the window and gestures for you to do the same. But I want to be careful here, he says, because there is a version of this teaching that gets passed around in certain circles, and it is not quite what the Buddha meant. You may have heard it. The idea that your thoughts create your reality, that if you think positively, positive things happen, that if you hold a clear intention, the universe will arrange itself accordingly. I have heard it, you say. And does it feel true to you? You think about this honestly. Sometimes, you say, and sometimes it feels like a way of blaming people for their circumstances. Yes, he says. That is exactly the problem with that reading. It takes something true, that the mind is a powerful condition, and inflates it into something false, that the mind is the only condition, or the decisive condition, or the condition that overrides all others. The teaching says something different. He looks out at the morning light crossing the floor. What the teaching says is more humble and more honest. The mind is a condition. Intention is a condition, a powerful one, and one that is more accessible to you than most other conditions in your life. But it operates within a web of other conditions. Your body, your history, the circumstances around you, the choices of other people, the vast impersonal workings of the world. You do not create reality. You participate in the shaping of what arises from within a web you did not design and cannot fully see. He pauses. That is actually more useful than the inflated version, because it is true. How so, you ask? Because if the inflated version were true, he says, then failure would always mean a failure of mind. Every difficulty in your life would be evidence that you thought the wrong thoughts, held the wrong intentions. This produces a particular kind of self-cruelty that has nothing to do with the teaching. He folds his hands in his lap. The Buddha's teaching is this: when the mind is corrupted, meaning contracted, aversive, grasping, driven by craving or fear, it acts in ways that create suffering. And when the mind is clear, meaning settled, attentive, moved by understanding rather than compulsion, it acts in ways that create the conditions for well-being. The difference is practical. A contracted mind sees threats where a settled mind sees possibility. The world itself has not changed. What the mind can receive from it has, shaped by the quality of attention brought to the contact. He gestures for you to think of something specific. Think of a morning when you woke anxious, he says. Every small thing that went wrong confirmed the anxiety. A delayed message became evidence of rejection. A minor difficulty became proof that the day was lost. The world served your fear, and your fear served the world. You recognize this exactly. Now think of a morning when you woke rested and open, he says. The same kind of minor delay was simply a delay. The same kind of difficulty was simply a problem to be solved. What changed? The mind, you say. The mind. He agrees. And the mind is a condition. When it changes, what arises from contact with the world changes. The world has not changed, but the mind is now in contact with a different set of possibilities within the same world. He rises and moves slowly around the small room, as if what he is about to say requires a little more space than sitting still can offer. The image I find most useful for this teaching is a garden. The mind is not a wish-granting device, but it is something like soil. The quality of the soil, its depth, its nutrients, its capacity to hold water, its health, shapes what can take root in it and grow. You cannot grow certain plants in depleted soil, no matter how sincerely you want to. But in rich, well-tended soil, things that could not grow before become possible. He stops beside the window. What depletes the soil of the mind? Habitual craving, habitual aversion, the constant reaching and rejecting that keeps the mind in a state of agitation. The second arrow, picked up again and again until it is simply part of how the mind operates. And what enriches it, you ask? Attention, he says. Honest attention to what is actually present, without the overlay of judgment or demand. Intention that arises from understanding rather than fear. The practice of returning, again and again, to what is here rather than to the story the mind constructs about what is here. And over time, this is the key thing, over time, these qualities change the very structure of what the mind brings to each new moment. You look at your own hands for a moment. The same hands that picked up the second arrow so many times. The same hands that could, apparently, learn to set it down. There is a teaching, the monk continues, returning to his cushion, which says that intention is karma. We will come to what karma actually means shortly, but karma in the sense of the intentional quality of what you do shapes the conditions of what arises next. When you act from generosity, generosity becomes a stronger condition in your mind and in the minds of those around you. When you act from fear, fear becomes a stronger condition. The universe keeps no ledger. The mind is soil, and what you plant in it regularly is what grows. He pauses. This is the teaching underneath the teaching of the wheel following the hoof. The suffering that follows a corrupted mind is the natural arising of what was planted. The wheel follows the hoof, not because something external decides to make it follow, but because the wheel is attached to the hoof. The connection is internal, specific, lawful. The morning light has shifted now, the pale rectangle moving slowly across the floor toward the far wall. You watch it for a moment. So the mind matters, you say. Profoundly, he says, and not in a way that should produce anxiety. Notice something. The teaching does not say the mind must be perfect. It says that a clear mind, even a partially clear mind, a mind that is learning to notice rather than a mind that has already attained some ideal, creates conditions for less suffering. Even a single moment of genuine attention is a condition. It changes something, in a small and real way. In what follows, he looks at you carefully. You have been attending carefully today, and yesterday, and in the hours of the night when you sat with the teaching instead of setting it aside. These moments of attention are conditions. They are accumulating in the soil of the mind, whether you can see their effects yet or not. You sit with this. The monk says nothing more for a while, which allows the teaching to settle rather than adding more words to it. The mind is a condition, he says eventually. Intention is a condition. What you bring to this moment is a condition for what arises in the next one. Specifically and really, he pauses. I am going to leave you with a question, he says, and I want you to hold it, not solve it. He waits a moment. Most people have heard of karma, and most people understand it as something like a cosmic accounting system. Good actions earn good returns, bad actions earn punishment, and somewhere behind the apparent randomness of life, accounts are being settled. If that understanding is not quite what the Buddha meant, if karma is something more specific, more honest, and more dignified than that, what might it actually be? He leaves you with the question in the quiet room, the light still moving slowly across the floor, the garden of the mind turning over in silence, growing what it has been given, becoming what conditions allow it to become. He goes to make tea, and while he is gone, you sit with the garden image. You think about what has been planted in the soil of your own mind over the years, mostly without choosing. The habit of scanning for what might go wrong. The reflex of self-criticism so practiced it runs on its own. This too is soil. This too is what grew from conditions. But also the capacity to sit still and listen, which you have been exercising since you arrived. The willingness to let the teaching work on you. These are also conditions. These too are things being planted. The monk returns with 2 bowls of tea. I want to try something, he says, settling back onto his cushion. Close your eyes for a moment. You do. Bring your attention to your breath. Just notice it moving. In, out, the air arriving, the body settling. You follow this. The breath is there, patient and unhurried, as it has been all morning without you noticing it. Now, he says quietly, bring to mind something that has been a source of difficulty recently. A situation, a relationship, a feeling you carry. Just let it be present. You do not need to analyze it or explain it. Simply let it arrive. Something arrives. You know what it is. You let it be present. Notice what happens to the breath, the monk says. Notice what happens to the body. Notice the quality of the mind right now, with this thing present in it. You notice a contraction somewhere in the chest, the breath slightly shallower, the mind perceptibly narrowed, a particular readiness to protect, to defend, to explain. That quality of mind you are feeling right now, the monk says, is a condition. It shapes what this moment can offer you. From inside that contraction, certain perceptions are possible and others are not. From inside that narrowness, certain responses can arise and others cannot. He pauses. Now release it gently. Return to the breath. Simply the breath, the body, the room. You release it. The contraction doesn't disappear entirely, but it eases. The breath deepens slightly, without effort. The room becomes present again. The light, the warmth of the tea bowl in your hands, the quality of the silence. That release, the monk says, is also a condition. Small, immediate, real. The world has not changed. The situation has not changed. But the quality of what the mind can receive from this moment has changed. And from this quality of mind, different responses become possible. He opens his eyes and looks at you. This is what the Dhammapada is pointing at. A mind shaped by grasping touches everything it meets and leaves the mark of that grasping on it. A mind shaped by clarity touches the same world and brings something different to contact. The wheel follows the hoof. The teaching is describing how conditions work at the level of mind. You think of the verse again. The wheel following the hoof. The shadow that never departs. There is something about the shadow image, you say. It sounds like something inescapable. Read it in the other direction, he says. If you act from a clear mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never departs. You cannot lose it, cannot leave it behind. Cultivate this quality of mind, and its fruits go with you wherever you go. This image settles differently than you expected. The shadow as something you could carry well, rather than something that pursues you. The mind I have been living in, you say carefully, has not been this kind. No, he says, and that is what conditions produced. It is what grew from the soil that was given to you, and from what was subsequently planted, and from the habits that developed over years of automatic response. It is the current state of the garden, nothing more. He pauses. And gardens can be tended. This is what practice is. This is what sitting still and attending is. This is what bringing honest awareness to a difficult feeling, rather than immediately reaching for the second arrow, is. Each of these is a small act of cultivation, real and accumulating, and pointing the soil towards something different. The light has fully cleared the window frame now and fallen warm and direct across the shelves of old books. The room smells of paper and wood and something faintly herbal from the tea. The mind matters, the monk says simply. Yours matters. The attention you have been bringing to this teaching, to this day, it is creating conditions. Slowly, without announcement, enriching the soil. He sips his tea. You sip yours. Outside, the sound of monks at their duties. Someone slowly raking gravel. The monastery continuing in its patient daily rhythm, conditions arising and passing. The morning light has moved. It no longer falls across the floor in long parallel strips, but has climbed the far wall of the book room, sitting now in a warm square above the shelves where the older texts are kept, their spines faded, their pages carrying the scent of cedar and dust. You have been sitting with the monk's question since he left, turning it the way you might turn a stone that catches the light differently depending on the angle. If karma is something other than cosmic accounting, what might it actually be? The door opens. The monk enters with the ease of a man who has walked through that doorway 10,000 times, carrying 2 small cups of tea, the steam rising in thin threads that drift and dissolve before reaching the ceiling. He sets 1 cup in front of you without ceremony and lowers himself into the wooden chair across from yours. I left you with a question, he says. You nod. Good, he says. Questions are more valuable than answers when you are first approaching something true. Answers close the mind. Questions open it. He wraps his hands around his cup, looks down at the surface of the tea for a moment, and then looks back at you. "Let me tell you a story," he says. "A simple story, old and traditional, passed down in many forms across many lands. You may have heard a version of it." You settle back. "There was a farmer," he begins, "who lived at the edge of a village. He had one horse, a field, a son, and very little else. The horse was everything to him. His livelihood, his transport, the muscle that turned his soil each season." The monk's voice is unhurried. Outside the window, the sound of wind moving through pine branches arrives and then fades. "One morning," he continues, "the farmer woke to find the gate of the paddock open and the horse gone. His neighbors came when they heard, and they gathered around the empty paddock, shaking their heads. 'What terrible luck,' they said, 'the worst luck. You must be devastated.' The farmer looked at the empty paddock for a long moment. Then he said, 'Maybe.' The monk pauses and lifts his cup. 3 days later, he says, the horse returned, and it did not return alone. It came back leading a small herd of wild horses, 7 of them, strong and young, running through the open gate and into the paddock. The neighbors came again, their faces bright now. 'What extraordinary luck,' they said. 'You must be overjoyed.' The farmer looked at the 7 horses. He said, 'Maybe you are listening now the way you rarely listen, with your whole body, the tea warming your hands through the cup. There is something about a story heard in stillness that reaches places explanation cannot find. The mind, tired from its long day of managing and deciding, lowers its guard. It stops looking for the point and simply follows.' The following week, the monk continues, the farmer's son was trying to break in one of the wild horses. The horse threw him, and the son's leg snapped in 2 places. The neighbors returned, their voices low and sorrowful. 'What terrible luck,' they said again. 'After such fortune, to have this happen.' The farmer looked at his son lying on the ground. 'Maybe,' he said. The following month, the monk says, soldiers came through the village conscripting young men for a war that few of them would survive. They passed over the farmer's son because his leg was broken and he could not march. Every young man in the village was taken. The son alone remained. The monk sets down his cup. 'The neighbors did not come this time,' he says quietly. 'They were grieving their own sons.' But you can imagine what the farmer might have said, had anyone thought to ask. You turn the story over in your mind. The horse, the horses, the leg, the soldiers. Each time the neighbors were certain. Each time the farmer said, 'maybe.' Each time, the next condition arrived and changed everything. A silence opens in the room. Now, the monk says, most people hear that story and they take from it a lesson about perspective, about reserving judgment, about the limits of knowing how things will turn out. He tilts his head slightly, and that is a reasonable thing to take from it. The mind that clings to this is good and this is bad does suffer more than the mind that holds events loosely. That is a reasonable reading of the story, and I understand why people take it that way. You wait. I told it to you, he says, because the farmer understood something that most of us spend our lives circling around. He understood that what happens to us and what we do with what happens to us are not the same thing. He leans forward slightly. The horse running away, he says, was a condition. The horses returning, the son's injury, the soldiers passing through. These were all conditions. The farmer could not choose the conditions. He could not control what arose. In every moment, the farmer simply chose his response. He chose to remain open. He chose to meet what arrived without deciding in advance what it meant. That choice, the monk says, is what the Buddha called karma. He lets that land. In the language the Buddha taught in, he says, the word is karma. In Sanskrit, it becomes karma. And in most of the world, that word has been translated into something that would have bewildered the Buddha entirely. He gives a small smile. Something like a divine ledger, in which your good deeds earn you blessings and your bad deeds earn you punishments, administered by the universe itself. You find yourself almost smiling with him. The Buddha was very clear. The monk says, his voice returning to its steady register, about what karma actually is. He said it plainly in the Anguttara Nikaya, the collection of his teachings arranged by number. He said, intention, I tell you, is karma. Intending, one does karma by way of body, speech, and mind. The monk repeats it slowly. Intention, he says, is karma. The intention behind the response to the event. The pine trees shift outside. A bird you cannot identify calls twice and is silent. Think of what this means, the monk says. The horse running away, the injury, the soldiers, the fortune, the catastrophe, the reprieve. These are all conditions. They arise. They cease. They were arranged by nothing. They are simply the way conditions flow, one giving rise to the next, in the long chain of dependent arising that you and I have been sitting with these past hours. He looks at you directly. What the farmer chose to plant in each of those moments was his intention to remain open, his intention to say maybe rather than certainly, his intention to meet each condition without cementing it into a fixed story about his worth, his fate, or his future. That planting, the monk says quietly, is karma. That is what carries forward. You are quiet. Outside the window, the light has deepened, the pine shadows falling longer now against the lower terrace. A fly lands briefly on the rim of your cup and then is gone. You sit with this for a long moment. The tea has cooled. You drink the last of it and find it has taken on a slightly different quality now, something earthier, less bright than when it was hot, but still good, still worth drinking. Most of us, the monk says, have spent years carrying a version of karma that functions as guilt, as weight. We look back at things we have done or failed to do, and we believe the universe is now balancing the ledger against us. We feel we deserve the difficulty we are experiencing, or we feel that if we could just accumulate enough good deeds, the cosmic accounting would eventually swing in our favor. He is quiet for a moment. The Buddha was teaching agency. He says simply, you feel something in you shift. He was saying, in this moment, right now, there is an intention forming. And that intention, whatever the conditions that surround it, whatever has come before, whatever is pressing in from outside, that intention is yours. It is the one thing in the whole stream of arising that is shaped by something you might call a self, even though, as we have discussed, that self is also a process, a river, a flowing thing. He stands slowly and walks to the window. Below, you can see the lower terrace, the stones, the edge of the garden. A monk you do not know is moving along the path below with a broom, sweeping in long, steady strokes, unhurried. When that monk sweeps, your monk says without turning, there is an intention behind it. Perhaps he sweeps because it is his duty. Perhaps he sweeps because his mind is restless and the rhythm calms it. Perhaps he sweeps because he genuinely loves the clean stone and the act of restoring it. Perhaps all three at once. He pauses. Each of those intentions, though the physical act looks identical, conditions something different in him and in the world he moves through. The monk who sweeps with resentment has chosen one karma. The monk who sweeps with care has chosen another. The floor looks the same to anyone walking across it. The difference lives only in what was planted, in what will continue growing in the quiet interior of the man holding the broom. He turns back to face you. The karma is the intention that sweeps. You look at your own hands in your lap. There is something else worth knowing, the monk says, settling again into his chair. The Buddha did not say that karma was the only force shaping what happens to you. He was quite specific about this. He listed what he called the niyamas, the orders of conditionality, and karma was only one of 5. He counts on his fingers. Physical conditions, such as weather, geography, the body's own biology. Biological conditions, such as the growth of seeds and the aging of organisms. Psychological conditions, such as the habits of the mind. Social conditions, such as the pressure of families and cultures. And moral conditions, the ripening of intentions through action. Karma belongs to that last category alone. So, he says, when your leg breaks, it is almost certainly not karma. When soldiers come through the village, that is not karma arranging the world around you. These things are physical, biological, social conditions, arising from their own streams of cause and effect, indifferent, vast, entirely outside the moral sphere. Karma, he says simply, is what you intend to do about it. The light in the room has shifted again. It is moving toward the golden hour now, that quality of afternoon light that seems to thicken as it falls, amber where it touches the shelves, the cups, the dust in the air. You came here carrying something, the monk says, and his voice is gentler now. I do not know exactly what. It is the kind of weight that accumulates over years, layer by layer, the kind that makes you wonder sometimes whether you are somehow responsible for your own difficulty. He holds your gaze. The question the Buddha asks is, what are you intending right now, in this moment, in response to what has arisen? Something in your chest loosens very slightly. The loosening is small. You do not want to name it too quickly, the way the farmer's neighbors were too quick to assign meaning. But something has shifted. A small opening where there was pressure before. The farmer, the monk says, did not earn the wild horses. He did not earn the son's broken leg. He did not earn the soldier's indifference. He was simply present, within conditions he could not control, planting intentions he could. A pause. That is the whole of it, he says. That is karma. The rest is commentary. There is no moral weight you need to carry forward from here. The ledger is not yours to balance. The universe is keeping no score. He reaches out and picks up your empty cup, examines it briefly, as if reading something in the residue at the bottom, and sets it back down. Later tonight, he says, when you are lying in the dark and your mind returns, as it will, to the things that trouble you, notice the intention that forms in response. The mind will offer you options. It will offer contraction, blame, the familiar groove of the story you have been telling yourself. It will also offer, more quietly, openness. The farmer's maybe. That quiet offering, he says, is always there. It does not require great equanimity. It only requires that you notice, even briefly, that you have the capacity to choose your intention. The wind moves through the pines outside again, and somewhere below in the monastery, a bell sounds once, a single clear note that rises and slowly dissolves into the quiet. Let what I have told you move through you the way that bell note moves through the air, the monk says. You do not need to hold it. You do not need to understand every part of it tonight. Just let it be present with you as you sleep, the way a fire in the next room warms you without your having to tend it, without your having to think about it at all. Place your attention gently on your chest, only to notice what is there, without changing it, without fixing it, without needing it to be other than it is. There may be something there that has been present for a long time, a kind of weight or a particular tightness, something familiar enough that you have stopped naming it. Something that arrives most clearly when the day has ended and the distractions have quieted and there is nothing left between you and what is actually here. Notice it, if it is there. Stay with it for a moment, without moving from it, without asking it to go. The monastery is quiet now. The day has folded into evening, and evening into something darker and more still. Your room is small, lit by a single lamp on the low table near the window. Through the glass you can see the shapes of the pine trees against a sky that has deepened to the dark blue of late night, the stars just beginning to emerge between the clouds. You are sitting on the edge of the sleeping mat, your hands in your lap, the lamp burning steadily beside you. The weight in your chest, the one you noticed a moment ago, or the one you have been carrying for so long that noticing it is almost a return to an old companion, is still there. And with it, as it so often comes, the familiar inner voice. Why? Why am I like this? What have I done wrong? What is wrong with me that I still carry this, that after everything, after trying, I am still here with this weight in my chest at the end of another day? This voice knows many forms. Sometimes it asks why, in the language of religion, have I not been good enough, faithful enough, grateful enough? Sometimes it asks why, in the language of a culture that has told you suffering means something has gone wrong? Have I not worked hard enough, been positive enough, held the right thoughts? Sometimes it is less specific than any of these. Just the raw and shapeless question, the cry of a mind that wants to understand its own suffering and cannot. You have been in this monastery for some hours now, or it has been days, or an entire night that does not keep ordinary time. The weight traveled with you here. You know this particular kind of darkness. The mind at 2 a.m, or 3, or whatever late hour this is, when the night has grown so deep that it feels like a country unto itself. The small hours when the questions you manage to keep at a distance during daylight return, and will not be reasoned with. A soft knock at the door. You say nothing, and the door opens. The monk stands in the doorway with a small lamp of his own, its flame barely moving in the still air of the corridor. "You are awake," he says. He comes in and sets his lamp on the table beside yours, doubling the light in the room, and lowers himself to sit cross-legged on the floor a short distance away, his robe settling around him. "I thought you might be," he says. You look at him. "The first nights in a quiet place are often the hardest," he says. "When everything stops, what you have been carrying becomes audible again." He is quiet for a moment, watching the two flames. "I have something I have been waiting to say to you since the evening began. Something the Buddha said, and something that most of the world has managed to misunderstand almost entirely." He looks at you steadily. Most people have heard that the Buddha's great teaching was about suffering, and most people have assumed that what he meant was suffer less, be more detached, stop wanting things, reach a state in which pain no longer touches you. He pauses. That was not his teaching. You wait. The first time the Buddha taught after his awakening, the monk says, he went to a deer park near a city called Varanasi. He sat with 5 men who had known him before his awakening and who had been waiting for him, and he gave them what became known as his first discourse, the teaching that set the wheel of the Dharma turning for the very first time. He began with a statement so plain that it is easy to miss the weight of it. He said, "Suffering exists." The monk lets this settle in the room. He did not say, "Suffering means you have failed." He did not say, "The universe is testing you," or that your past actions are being balanced against you now. He said, "Suffering exists. It is real. It is here. And here is what it is." He gave a list. Birth is suffering, because to enter a life is to enter one that will involve difficulty. Aging is suffering. Death is suffering. Association with what we dislike is suffering. Separation from what we love is suffering. And this, perhaps the most human item on the list, not getting what we want, is suffering. The monk pauses. "Look at that list," he says quietly. "There is nothing in it about deserving. Nothing in it about punishment. Nothing in it about your choices having been wrong, your character deficient, your spiritual practice insufficient. Suffering, the Buddha said, is a feature of conditioned existence. It belongs to the territory of being alive in a world of changing conditions." Something in you is listening very carefully now. "This is not a trivial observation," he says. To say that suffering belongs to the territory of being alive is to say, suffering is not evidence of anything having gone wrong. The presence of suffering in your experience is no more a verdict on you than the presence of weather in the sky is a verdict on the sky. He holds this for a moment. The second thing he said was this: suffering has a cause. And here is where the teaching becomes something remarkable, because the cause he named was specific and humble and entirely without cosmic architecture. He said the cause is craving, the mind's thirst to have things be other than they are, the reaching for what is gone, the reaching toward what has not arrived, the grip on what is here right now but changing, the mind's constant pulling against the current of conditions. The monk places his hands in his lap. Craving is the condition, he says. That is all it is. And you will notice, if you look at that sentence carefully, that the cause is not you. It is a process. It is something that arises in the mind the way wind arises in the sky, because the conditions for it are present, because the mind has been shaped over years of living and experiencing and being moved by a world that gives and takes in unequal measure to reach toward what is pleasant and recoil from what is painful. Craving is extraordinarily ordinary, he says. It is what happens in the human mind when it contacts a world of changing conditions. It is the automatic reaching and recoiling that is so fundamental to experience that it precedes deliberate thought. Craving carries no moral weight and no judgment. It is the most human thing there is. He pauses, and in the pause the lamplight wavers once and steadies. And when suffering arises, as it will, because craving will arise, because conditions will press on the mind, most people hear a question form beneath it. The question is, what did I do wrong? You feel something tighten slightly in your chest. The recognition is immediate and familiar. The question of what you did wrong carries real weight, he says. It is perhaps the most common form of suffering that runs beneath all other suffering in the world today. The suffering of shame, the suffering of self-accusation, the suffering that says, I should not be suffering. Something must be wrong with me that I am. He looks at you with steady attention. The Buddha gave you a precise answer to that question. His answer was, you are suffering because craving is present. Craving arose because conditions are such that craving arises in a mind that is alive and in contact with the world. And that, he says, is the complete explanation. There is no hidden verdict. There is no cosmic score. There is only, these conditions have produced this state of mind. As those conditions change, the state of mind will change. The flame of your lamp moves slightly, as if the room has taken a quiet breath. Think about what this changes, he says. When you sit in the dark with a weight in your chest and ask yourself, what is wrong with you? You are adding something to the original pain. The pain of craving is one layer. But the question of what is wrong with you adds a second layer on top of the first. The Buddha called this the second arrow. The first arrow is the pain itself, arising from conditions, part of what it means to be alive and awake in contact with a world that will not hold still. The second arrow is the story layered over the pain, the judgment, the shame, the demand that you should be fine when you are not. He pauses. The second arrow, he says quietly, is always optional. He holds that in the air for a moment. The first arrow is real, he says. Pain is real. The ache of separation, the frustration of wanting things to be different than they are. These are real, and the Buddha never asked you to pretend otherwise. The teaching is not that difficulty is an illusion or that the mind should feel nothing. The teaching is far more precise and practical than that. The teaching is suffering has a cause, and the cause is something specific and identifiable in the mind. When you can see it clearly, the second arrow falls away on its own, because the shame that fuels the second arrow requires a story. And that story cannot survive clear seeing. Something stirs in you at that. When you meet your suffering with the question of where the craving is, and you look clearly for the place where the mind is grasping, pulling, refusing to let conditions be what they are, something different becomes available. You are meeting what is actually here. You are looking at the condition that produced the suffering. And in that looking, the craving begins, very slowly, very gently, to release a little of its grip. This, the monk says, is what the Buddha called understanding, the sight that sees clearly. And when you see clearly, the shame has nothing to hold on to. Shame requires a verdict. Understanding dissolves the verdict entirely. Outside the window, the pine trees are very still. The moon has risen and is casting pale light on the high peaks in the distance, the snow faintly luminous against the dark. There is one more thing, he says, and his voice softens further. The Buddha did not stop at suffering and its cause. He went on to say, the cause can cease, the grasping can loosen, the craving can be seen so clearly that it releases. And when it releases, even for a moment, even partially, the suffering ceases to the same degree. He called this the third truth, the truth of cessation, the possibility that the mind can be in contact with conditions without being set into turmoil by them, a peace that does not depend on conditions arranging themselves in your favor. He looks at the lamp. He did not say this is easy, the monk adds. He said it is possible. A silence holds the room. You do not need to trace the craving tonight. You do not need to release it, or find the peace the Buddha was pointing toward, or arrive at anything in particular. What I am offering you is smaller and more immediate than all of that. Just this. The weight in your chest is real. The suffering is real. And the fact that you are suffering says nothing at all, about your worth. It says, conditions are present that produce suffering. It says, craving is here, or has been here, or is the residue of a long pattern of reaching in a life that has been full and difficult and fully human. He rises slowly, and in rising his shadow moves across the wall, large and brief, and settles back to ordinary size. He picks up his lamp. Sleep, he says. What you have understood tonight does not need to be held tightly. It can rest in you the way that moonlight rests on the snow, present, illuminating, requiring nothing from you. He moves toward the door. Understanding is enough, he says from the doorway. You do not need to arrive anywhere tonight or resolve anything before morning comes. You are already here, with conditions that are what they are, and a mind that is doing what minds do, and suffering that is nothing more and nothing less than what the Buddha said it was. The door closes quietly. The room holds one lamp, your lamp, its flame steady and unhurried in the still night air. Outside the window, the pines stand in the dark. The moon, the snow on the distant peaks, pale and clear, receiving the light without needing to keep it. The lamp will burn a while longer before its fuel is spent. The moon will travel the length of the window and be gone before morning. The pines will stand in the dark until light returns to them. And you will be here through all of it. A condition among conditions, a mind carried forward into whatever comes next, neither punished nor rewarded by the conditions themselves, simply present within them. You are here. There is a particular exhaustion that lives in long searching. The mind that has turned the same questions over and over for so long that the questions themselves have worn smooth at the edges, like stones in a river. Why did this happen? What does it mean? What should I do? What is the answer? This mind is familiar to you, and there is a moment, arriving without announcement, without drama, when this mind does something unexpected. It stops. The stopping carries no defeat in it. The stopping is a form of understanding. The mind has searched long enough and found no hidden answer, and eventually the searching becomes visible to itself. The mind sees that it has been searching, and in that visibility, the demand softens. The question loses its urgency, and what remains, in the place where the demand was, is something quieter than anything the searching ever found. This is where you are now. The lamp in your room has burned lower through the night. The flame is small and steady, and the light it casts is warmer and more intimate than it was when the monk first placed it on your table. Outside the window, the sky has shifted almost imperceptibly. There is a quality to the darkness now that is different from an hour ago, a faint loosening at the edges, the very earliest suggestion that the night is moving towards something else. You did not sleep. Or you did sleep, briefly, and woke into this. You are not certain which. What you are certain of is that something has settled. The weight in your chest that you noticed at the beginning of the night is still present, in a way, but different, less pressing. The way a stone carried in a pocket is present, but no longer felt on every step. You think about everything the monk has told you over these hours, in the sitting rooms and on the terraces and in the quiet of this small room, the way conditions give rise to conditions, the way the mind is a forerunner, the way karma is intention and intention is what carries forward, the way suffering arises from craving, from the mind's thirst to have things be other than they are. And underneath all of it, the same thread running through everything. Nothing arises without conditions. You sit with that for a while. There is something particular about this moment. The small room, the low light, the night stretched long behind you. All of it conditions, none of it random. All of it pointing back to the same simple fact. Nothing arises without conditions. And in that fact, strangely, there is something like relief. The world has a shape. The shape is not a punishment. It is simply what conditions do. They give rise to what they give rise to, and you are in the middle of it, a presence within the weave, carried forward by conditions you did not choose, and conditions you have chosen, and conditions you are choosing right now. The lamp flame moves once, very slightly, in some imperceptible draft, and settles back to still. The monk had shared a passage, sometime in the hours past, from a collection of the Buddha's utterances called the Udana. He had been careful with it, not dressing it in mystery or making it unreachable. He said the Buddha spoke of an unconditioned, something unborn, unbecome, unmade, and pointed to it as the very ground of liberation. Without such an unconditioned, the Buddha said, there would be no escape from the conditioned. The monk had held this passage gently. What the Buddha was pointing toward, he said, was the possibility of a mind that has ceased demanding that conditions arrange themselves otherwise. The mind that has stopped adding the second layer of suffering to every arising. That mind, in the Buddha's language, is touching something unconditioned, something that does not arise from grasping, something that is available in this moment and in any moment to anyone who has seen clearly enough. You did not fully understand this when he said it. You are not certain you fully understand it now, but something in you is closer to it than you were at the beginning of this night. You think of what that closeness feels like. The closeness has a different quality than arrival. It is more like the ground beneath your feet becoming more solid. The mind that was reaching, demanding, interrogating the conditions. That mind has grown quieter, and in its quieting, something else has become audible. A steadiness that was present all along, underneath the searching, the way water is present underneath the surface of a river even when the surface is turbulent. He had also recited a passage from the Therigatha, the verses of the elder women of the early community around the Buddha. A woman named Ambapālī, celebrated for her beauty in her youth, who in her old age became a devoted student of the teaching. She wrote a poem about her own aging body. She said, "Such was this body, and now it is weary, the home of many aches and pains. An aged house whose plaster has fallen off. What moved you when the monk spoke these words was not the image of decay. It was the quality of the speaker. Ambapālī was observing clearly and without resistance the way conditions had moved through her. The beauty arose from conditions. The aging arose from conditions. The body itself arose from conditions and would return to conditions. And in watching all of this arise and change and pass, she had found a way to rest inside it, to see it all clearly and to hold it without the second arrow of grief or demand. There was a phrase the monk used that has stayed with you, meeting experience without requiring it to be different. Ambapālī had done this with her own body. She had looked at what aging had brought, the aches, the slowing, the loss of what once drew admiration, and she had met it without requiring it to be otherwise. She had met it as a person meets a condition. Here is what has arisen. Here is what is passing. And underneath the arising and the passing, something in her that was neither young nor old, neither beautiful nor plain, something that the conditions had moved through but had not destroyed. The monk had said, "This is what clear seeing gives you. A resting place that does not require the world to be other than it is." The Buddha's teaching, as the monk has laid it out across these hours, carries a different quality than most teachings you have encountered. It arrives with description rather than prescription. It says, "Here is how things arise. Here is the condition that produces suffering. Here is the condition that allows suffering to cease." And in that description, something opens. Because description can be investigated directly, in your own experience, right now, without waiting, you breathe. Outside the window, the sky continues its slow shift. The faintest line of grey has appeared at the horizon, where the dark of the peaks meets the dark of the sky. The pines are beginning to acquire their shapes again, very gradually, as if being called forward by the coming light. You think of all the conditions that have brought you to this moment, the particular accumulation of your life, the choices and the circumstances, the things that happened and the things that did not, the loves and the losses and the long stretches of ordinary days, the specific texture of your own experience that has built, layer by layer, into the person sitting here in this small room, in this pre-dawn quiet, watching a flame and a horizon, all of it arising from conditions, all of it conditionally intelligible, none of it random, none of it arbitrary, and none of it requiring a cosmic verdict. You feel something release in you at this, quietly and without fanfare. Nothing arises without conditions. Seen clearly, the monk had said, that is enough. You do not need a hidden plan woven into the conditions. You do not need the conditions to be secretly arranged in your favor. The understanding itself, the clear seeing of how things arise, is the liberation the Buddha was describing. He had said this simply, without making it a promise, without dressing it in the language of transcendence, and that simplicity was what landed most deeply. You have spent years, perhaps, looking for a teaching that would decode the pattern of your life and show you its hidden meaning. And the teaching that has found you here, in these slow hours of night moving toward morning, says, the pattern is conditions. Conditions giving rise to conditions, in the long unfolding chain the Buddha described. And you are in the pattern, and you are also a condition, capable of shaping what arises next through your intention, your attention, your care. And that, just that, is both the whole truth and enough. The monk had said something else that comes back to you now. He had said, the teaching is not asking you to stop being human. It is asking you to understand what being human involves. The arising and passing of conditions, the presence of craving, the possibility of seeing clearly, the availability of intention as a shaping force in the long chain of what comes next. All of this available to you, right now, available right now, in this version of yourself as you are, tired from a long night, sitting in this room, with this understanding settling gradually into you, the lamp flame, small and steady in the still air, the sky at the window, shifting almost too slowly to perceive. You breathe, and the breath moves through you steadily and without effort, because this is what the body does, even in the middle of the night, even when the mind is full, even when you are not asking it to. There is a quality of rest that is different from the peace of resolution. This rest arrives when the demand for resolution softens. When the mind releases its grip on the idea that conditions must mean something beyond what they are, when it stops adding that second layer of story and shame and demand to what is simply arising. The Buddha called this, in the tradition, a kind of disenchantment, a seeing through. The mind that has looked long enough and clearly enough at the way things arise, that it has lost its enchantment with the idea that somewhere behind the conditions, a hidden meaning waits. The mind that can observe conditions arising and passing, observe craving, arising and passing, observe suffering, arising and passing, without adding to any of it the story that something has gone wrong. This mind is fully present. It is in complete contact with experience. It meets what arises without turning away. It is here, in the small room with the lamp and the coming dawn, simply no longer at war with where it is. You have been sitting for a long time now. Your legs are aware of the floor beneath them. Your back is aware of the hours it has held you upright. These are conditions too. The body's conditions, the body's honest report of the night it has sat through. You do not move. You sit with the body's report, and you do not ask it to be different. This, you think, is a small version of what the monk has been describing. The willingness to sit with the conditions as they are. The willingness to let the lamp burn low, to let the night be a long one, to let the body be tired and the mind be full, and to meet all of this with something other than the demand that it be otherwise. The sound of movement in the corridor, somewhere beyond the door. The quiet sound of footsteps that know where they are going. The monastery is beginning to wake. And then, faintly, a bell. Distant, clear, a single note that rises and expands in the pre-dawn air and slowly dissolves into the growing light. The sound of the community marking the moment between one kind of darkness and another. You hear it, and something in you responds. A quiet gathering, a soft orientation toward whatever comes next. The conditions of this day are assembling themselves. The light is coming. The community around you is moving into its morning. The bell has struck and the bell note has passed. And you are here, in the middle of the passage, in the space between the night and whatever follows it. And you carry with you, quietly, what this night has given you. A clarity that is not certainty. A rest that is not the absence of difficulty. An understanding that the conditions are what they are, and that within the conditions, something is always possible. The next intention, the next clear seeing, the next moment of meeting what arises with a little more openness than the moment before. The lamp is still burning quietly, though the daylight coming through the window has begun to soften the room around it, making the flame seem smaller, more ordinary, easier to overlook. You watch it for a moment before you rise.